Sometimes when I'm doing sketches, I do sketches on transparency so I can change positioning of the elements of the carving. So this was just a collection of little ideas and things that I was working on for, oh, this was a little Christmas ornament, this was going to be another little relief carving, and then this was the little fox with a few little leaves that I wanted to do for the slab of basswood, with the bark left on the outside as a natural border or a finished frame. Placement is important. By having the fox smack dab in the center, it sort of makes it a little stoic and kind of stale. But by dropping them down just below basically the center of this slab, it'll give a nice placement for this little fox. So I'm going to take my little carbon paper and I'm going to start to trace them on. Okay, I'm going to attach a holding device to the back of the carving. This is a handy little vise to have. It allows you to kind of spin the piece, get at various angles, and make it a little easier to access some of the areas. You don't necessarily need to have such an elaborate holding device. So we put a couple of clamps down on the table. It just kind of helps keep your hands free when you're working on it. This brings it up a little bit higher so that I don't have to bend over. This is the 12 V tool. So I'm going to just kind of run this around the pencil lines. I don't want to hit the pencil lines. I want to keep the pencil lines visible so I don't lose the perspective of the carving and where my elements are going to be. Now, the deeper you go with this cut, the deeper your relief carving will be. The grain is all end grain because this is a center cut of the tree. But what's nice about it is it definitely has a consistency to the grain, so it's not going to run as if the grain was going vertical through the carving. It would have a tendency to want to chip off if I was putting a lot of pressure and making a deep cut. So the end grain holds itself very well. You notice that I'm resting my hand on the carving and just applying steady pressure as I'm creating this cut. And I keep my hand very close to the cutting edge of the tool to help give me enough control so that each cut is precise and it's not going to go past the pencil line. Okay, I want to do just a little shallower cut around the inside of these leaves as it's coming into the fur of the fox. This is not going to be as deep as the outside border, but I do want to outline them. A shallow line here to separate the forehead and the ear in the foreground and the ear in the background. And here I have them outlined. Okay, now I'm going to start to remove the background from our subject. I'm using a number 8 gouge in an 18 millimeter, and I'm going to be going sort of down into the V-cuts. So a little rocking and rolling the chisel is going to accentuate the cutting ability by at least twice, as opposed to just trying to straight push the tool. You see I'm using much more force by just pushing the chisel straight through. By creating that slicing motion, much less effort, much more control, and a much cleaner cut. As I'm removing the background, I'm also trying to keep my chisel marks going in sort of a nice little curving direction. If I was removing the wood in a haphazard way, it looks real sloppy. But by keeping the cuts fairly consistent in this almost little gentle spiral, it just gives a nice feel to the background. By having each of these cuts spiraling and curving, it brings your eye into the main subject. And that's just one of those little compositional things that you want to keep in mind when you're doing a carving. Okay, now I want to go back and recut with my V tool just to get a little more depth. We're going to go through this whole process just one more time, and that's going to give us the depth we're going to use for the rest of the carving. Okay, I put a pencil mark right back here so I know exactly where I started my final background cuts. So I want each of these to be almost consistent in the width from the edges of the cut. So I just step over about half the width of a chisel with each of the cuts. A lot of the success of a carving depends on how the cuts look. If they're all frayed and have a lot of choppiness to it. It looks sloppy. So there we have our background removed. I want to outline where the eye is, so I'm going to use that 15V tool and a 6mm, and this again is a little narrower of an angle than the 12. So this tool will make a deeper V cut, but not splay out as wide as the number 12 will do. And what I want to do is outline the eye, again staying away from the pencil line. Now with this carving, this is mostly just a profile. So we don't have a lot of changes of angles, so there's just going to be changes of depth to create the roundness of the head and disappearing behind, and the neck area disappearing behind the leaves. And the leaves we're going to give some curving shapes to also as we're moving along. I want to outline the lower jaw and the teeth which are in the foreground are his left teeth on the jaw. So these are going to be higher than the teeth on the right side of his jaw. And I'm just going to remove some of the wood on the inside of the mouth. And this will go down right to the depth of the background. I want to outline the nostril area of the nose and the front part of the ear. The cartilage part of the ear on most mammals is heavier in the front, and that gives the supporting structure for the rest of the ear, and then the back side of the ear is much thinner. And I'm creating these wiggle lines to help when I do the fur texturing so that we don't have a hard straight edge. So everything is done in with the curving, sweeping cut of the chisel. Okay, I went back to the number 8 gouge, 18mm, and I want to start to scoop out some of the inside of the ears. And because this left ear is in the foreground and this right ear is in the background, we have to adjust the height. So this is going to be at a lower level. You can almost think of relief carving as a staircase with one level dropping down past the other level, so that gives us a variation of depth and the illusion of more three-dimensional aspects to each of the elements of the carving. So by recessing the inside of the ear, it makes the cartilage part of the ear, the front part of the ear, look like it's closer to you. And then our right ear is going to be at a lower level, which will give it a little more depth. Let the back of the head and the neck disappear into our leaves. It does give the illusion of the leaves in the foreground and the fox being put into the background. Now with the forehead of the fox, we need a little hollow right in here to give us the bridge of the nose and then his muzzle area, and then there's the forehead and the eyebrow, if you will, of the fox. So we're going to put a little hollow right in here, because this is a very fleshy little part of the fox's face. Anatomy and familiarity with your subject is very important. Knowing where certain highs and lows of a relief carving should be are critical to making the carving successful. Most animals have a little peripheral notch that comes from the corner of the eye, and I'm putting that in with this V tool. There's a fleshiness underneath the lower eye, which is a muscle that helps to open and close the eye. So that's going to be a fleshy part there, and where the lip area is, The fur is shorter and finer on this part of the face than it's going to be on the back of the head. So the back of the head gets a heavier fur treatment. Whenever I'm doing a carving of a fox or a bobcat or a cardinal, I try to surround myself with as much reference material as I can get my hands on. And this has come from basically a lifelong collection of reference books, photos that I rip out of magazines, create files. So I have a file for foxes and coyotes and wolves, and that goes into one file. So when I'm doing a carving, I can pick out photos of various angles of faces and fur texturing and attitudes of the animals. Okay, what I'm doing is just getting a little finer detail for this back ear and the fur that's splaying up over the forehead, because we have three depths that we're dealing with here. We have the ear on the left side, which is in the foreground, the center of the forehead, which is going to cut between the two ears, and then the right ear, which is at a lower depth. So we have three depths that we're working within just this little area. This part of the ear and this part of the ear are the front parts of the two that are closest together, and these are the outside trailing edges of the ear, so they're going to be at a different depth. So realistic wildlife, caricature-ish kind of things all have to have a certain element of your subject. So the specific things are evident in your carving. Okay, now this is not exactly the leaf I'm using for these down here, but it gives me the idea of what the tips of the leaves look like and the curvatures of the veins. That the veins do not come and meet at a central point, but they're staggered. So I'm staggering my leaves. I'm going to give a little bit of a point to the fingers of the leaves and just make them look a little more oak leaf-like. This is my 11 gouge in a 4mm, and this is going to help to get in between the fingers of the leaves. I'm really sinking this chisel in here. As we had mentioned earlier before, this is all end grain that we're carving in, so the chances of it splitting are very, very remote. So that curve of this chisel is just perfect for sitting in here and getting those little points. I'm going to start to put some of my curves into the leaf and get rid of this flatness. This is a number 11 gouge in a 10mm, and with this gouge I'm going to start to create the hollow that I want for the center of the leaf. So I'm taking out the centers of the fingers and also the center of the leaf to create these really nice dynamic curves and rhythms. And carving is taking a specific tool to create a specific cut to give you a specific effect. And this is the effect I want. Nice deep curves for my leaves, have a lot of liveliness going on, a lot of interest in an otherwise somewhat subtle aspect of the carving. I mean, the leaf is not the main focal point, but it adds so much dimension to the carving, and the more highs and lows and curves you can put in, the better the overall effect will be. What I want to do is take off all the flat remaining spots on the leaf, because any flat spot is going to show up like a sore thumb. I'm going to take my a detail knife, and I'm going to start to crisp up the edges of the leaf and get a really nice transition from where the leaf ends and lays on top of the fox's fur. Because you see this, because of the chisel, I was torquing and twisting and really digging in there. Some of the edges are a little on the ratty side. I'm going to come back and crisp it all up with a nice deep stop cut. And this will be my final edges on the treatment of these leaves. Let's take this detail knife and start delineating some of our fox features. I want to undercut the eye, get a nice deep shadow, and start rounding off the eyeball. And I'm laying the blade on its bevel and using it like a spatula, like you would frost a cake, by just riding the bevel of the blade. The 11 gouge and 4mm will be used to just outline an upper eyelid, keeping this nice and full, and then dropping it down into the inside corner to give the illusion the whole eye is rolling in towards the center of the nose. We're going to address the mouth by giving the teeth a little bit more definition and put some stop cuts, and we're just going to bring the teeth just a little bit lower than the outside of the jaw. So I don't have any upper teeth showing, and it just gives it a little more relaxed look, and it's not as threatening. Now, it's important when you're doing a cut like this not to push the chisel down and pry it out, because you're going to snap the edge of your chisel. So if you saw I came in, and then I'm just going to wiggle it to help it cut the fibers, and you can't use this as a pry bar. Okay, so I'll take the detail knife, and holding it on an angle away from the center of the tooth, I'm going to make a stop cut and then start taking the wood away. And this is also going to help create the little tongue that's in the lower jaw. Cuts we want to make fairly deep because we want to round the teeth and give them a little dimension also. Take our 11 gouge, and I'm going to soften the edges. And I want to put the hint of another right canine tooth just in the background. Okay, I'm going to use an 11 gouge and a 2mm. Just want to get a shadow of an undercut on the roof of the fox's mouth. And just before we're done, we're going to back cut that canine just a little bit to give a little shadow behind it and separate it from the background. I think we should just address the ears and get them finished up, and then we're just going to do the refining on the face. Now, in order for the left ear to be standing in front of the right ear, we're going to do an undercut and create a shadow. Okay, 15 V-gouge to create a little undercut and shadow for the opening of the ear. If you notice, I have one light, and by positioning the light to the side, it shows me better the shadows, so it's not all bleached out. So it's overexposed. So as I'm turning the piece, different shadows are appearing, and I can kind of see where I need to cut, smooth things out, get rid of some of the little torn areas. With the stop cuts and the different levels that we put into this relief carving, it could be either painted or it could be left in a natural finish. In a natural finish, I would use Minwax Natural Stain, which is a clear stain. And that's going to show the grain of the wood tremendously, and it's really going to not only give it a nice finished look, but it's also going to darken the shadow areas. I'm going to put a few little directional arrows just to kind of give an idea of the way the fur will lay. This fur is going up in this direction, and then it's coming and flowing up towards the ears. Right about where the peripheral vision is, it starts to angle and curve downward towards the lower jaw. This is shorter fur around the muzzle area. And again, it has a tendency to change direction following the bony structure of the fox's skull. So it's not going to be just horizontal cuts that I'm putting in. I'm actually trying to simulate the direction of the fur in the way it lays in a natural animal. So I'm using just shorter surface roll strokes around the muzzle. And I'm rocking the chisel. Get a nice, crisp, clean cut. And this is long, coarser hair that follows down into the throat, so these cuts are going to become a little bit longer. So we don't have a lot of fur texture, but we have enough to simulate the flow of fur. Some of these cuts here are not complete because we have gone a little deeper. So now I'm going to go back and blend my background into the area going behind the fox's head. Okay, these are going to be very controlled cuts because I don't want to jam the chisel into the finished part of the ears or the shape of the fox. All right, now it's time for a little veining of the leaves, and I'll go back with my 16V tool in the 3mm. Okay, I'm going to just give it a good look over. Just make sure everything is nice and crisp. Okay, I'm going to take an old toothbrush, and then I'm just going to kind of rub it around and get rid of all of the little chips that might still be stuck in between some of our undercutting. Scotch-Brite pad works for this also. Any place I see a little chip that's still kind of being obstinate, I'll come in and just give another cut. Make sure you get it out of there. Minwax Natural. It's a clear stain, penetrates the wood really well, seals it up. Big old paintbrush, and put this on liberally. You'll see it soaks right in immediately because this is all end grain, and it just absorbs it like a sponge. It just disappears as you put it on. But I don't want to cover the bark. I want to leave the bark in a nice natural finish, so I'm just going to come right up to the edge with it. You see how it honeys it up really nice, but it doesn't darken the wood too much, so it doesn't become really heavy looking. It still retains a nice lightness about it. But you see how it helps darken the areas of the undercuts with the shadows that we were looking for in the beginning. Just soaks right in and makes them just a little bit more prominent. Gives a little bit more depth to the whole carving. And that's it.